Thank you everyone for being here. We're going now to start our panel on bi plus masculinity. I'm Aurelio Castro, a member of the leadership group team of the Bisexual Research Group, and I'll be your chair for this morning and afternoon or night, depending on where you are on your time zone. So we are going now to start with our presentation. And so I will just give you just a hint. Now I'll present our first presentation of the morning, Bisexual Father Families, Partners and Children Perspective on Bisexuality and Family Life by Maisie Matthews, she, her. Maisie is a third-year PhD student at the University College of London. Her work focuses on social experiences, family life, well-being in bisexual father families using a multi-method, multi-informant approach. So thank you, Maisie, for breaking the ice on this panel, and feel free to share any slides for your presentation.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'll put my slides up. Oh, it says host disabled participant.
Oh, yeah, just
make me a host.
Okay.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Maisie. I'm a PhD student at UCL. You make that. Yeah, so my research focuses on bisexual father families. And today I'm going to be talking about partners' perspectives. So not children. I just decided to focus on partners for the scope of the presentation today. So we're looking at experiences of family life among partners of bisexual fathers. So for some background, research that I conducted previously on bisexual fathers themselves found they use a range of identity management strategies to integrate bisexuality with family life. And so other research looking at bi people's relationships has found that bi negativity from partners can reduce relationship satisfaction, but for bi men in relationships with other bi people, bisexuality is actually found to have positive effects. So I'm interested in looking at the kind of partners' perspectives on this. And so in terms of family life, other LGBTQ plus parents have been found to value challenging traditional gender roles in their parenting, but we don't know as much about what this means for bisexual parents. And so with my previous research suggesting that bi dads think that their identity impacts their wider family relationships and roles, this study is going to look for the first time at what family members think about that. So the research question for this study was, how do partners with bisexual fathers experience family life? So I conducted 10 interviews with partners of bisexual dads. These were recruited through dads who'd taken part in my survey study. They put forward their partners who might be interested in taking part. And so these interviews were between about an hour and 2 hours, focusing on 5 areas, which were being a parent, family roles, well-being, father's bisexual identity, and social experiences and community. And then I transcribed and coded these and used thematic analysis to analyze them, which I'll talk about in a minute. So in terms of my sample, there were 10 partners with an average age of 37. The majority were female, the majority were straight, and the majority were white. And the children, so one of them didn't have children, but was a partner of the bisexual dad, and the rest of them had children with the bisexual dad. And the children were aged between 1 and 16 years. So, like I said, I conducted reflexive thematic analysis. I had 332 codes and developed 3 main themes out of these. So partners talked about their family life as taking place both within and outside the home. And so in terms of their private family life within the home, they described this as non-normative in a few different ways, but felt that in public, this could kind of move between being publicly normative and publicly non-normative. And so this move between these this wasn't like some families are normative, some non-normative. They kind of move between depending on factors such as stigma. This could be external stigma or dad's internalized stigma, social context, sort of like where they lived or sort of their work environment, that kind of thing, and access to supportive communities. So some partners felt that if they could really surround themselves with people they knew they'd be accepting, they could express their family in a more non-normative way, but not all families had access to those kinds of environments. So in terms of privately non-normative aspects of family life, partners talked about bi dads as being really involved fathers and kind of moving away from the idea of the traditional distant, non-engaged father. So one partner described their dad as, the bi dad as, he's always been a very present father, really always around, always open, always family first. And partners also talked about, within their family, trying to really normalize LGBTQ plus identities. So this was not just talking about the bi dad's identity himself and making the children aware of that, but also introducing children to other LGBTQ plus identities. This could be through sort of having them around their other gay or trans friends, that kind of thing, or talking to them about different family types. And partners really talked about wanting to foster an environment in which their child could feel open to question their sexuality and talk about this within the family. So this partner talks about wanting to have conversations with their children when they're older about everything, sexuality, gender, whatever. Partners also talked about their couple relationship, not just family life, as being non-normative. And so some partners also identified as bi. And so for these families, they felt that having this shared bi identity was really important and brought them closer together and introduced topics of conversation they wouldn't have had with a straight partner. But even for partners who identified as straight or gay themselves, they felt that just having the bi dad, having talked about these kind of things, introduce these aspects of that closeness in their couple relationship, things like talking about intimacy and attraction, that kind of thing, that they just didn't have with previous partners. And another aspect of this non-normative couple relationship was that a lot of partners talked about either discussing or exploring polyamory. So quite a few of the families had explored having open relationships or multiple partners, and felt that this brought something really positive to their relationship that they didn't see in kind of traditional family life. So this partner talks about how seeing the bi dad having relationships with other people, and particularly having sort of same gender relationships and interactions, felt really special to her, and she was really happy for him that he was exploring that outside of their relationship. And then the final way in which partners talked about their family life as non-normative was through challenging gender roles. So lots of these partners talked about how they personally wanted to move away from kind of traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity and who does what in the family, and felt that the bi dad really had more freedom to be open to these kinds of things, and they could explore those roles in a way that kind of moved away from expectations and focused more on individual strengths and preferences rather than just gender. So this partner says he has no expectation of me that I'm going to do the childcare or cooking and cleaning with a woman, and that's been the start of our relationship. That's huge because I don't want to be in those traditional roles either, so that's a massive advantage. So like I said, within the home, all partners talked about feeling that their family was kind of non-normative, challenging expectations. But the difference was they felt that in public spheres, this could really depend. They weren't always non-normative. Sometimes there were times when they felt that they wanted to present their family as being more normative. So this could take place through allowing heteronormative assumptions to be made. So a lot of partners said that the bi dad himself was assumed to be straight, particularly if he was in a relationship with a woman, or if he was just with the children. Even if he was in a same gender relationship, being with children, maybe we'll think that he was a straight dad. And sometimes it was easier to just let those assumptions be made. It was, rather than having to always say, actually, no, I'm bi, actually, no, we're a bi-father family, it was easier to just let people make their assumptions and not address it. So like this partner said, I'm a straight cis woman, he's a man married to me. No one really knows unless he comes out and says, oh, hey, I'm bisexual. And whilst some partners talked about kind of letting these assumptions be made, others felt that actually as a family, they were certain situations where they found they had to actively try and present themselves as being normative in order to kind of avoid stigma and avoid difficulties for their children in particular. So this family, both partners were bi, but they felt that at some situations, particularly around other people at school, they tried to kind of keep that hidden and let themselves be perceived as a typical family, because they didn't want their children to receive negative feedback from other kids if they knew that they were kind of a non-normative family. And so although partners talked about kind of seeing this as a protecting their family and kind of safety thing, they also talked about how this could have negative impacts. And so partners talked about how they kind of worried for bi dads that if they were suppressing or hiding this part of their identity, what that might mean for their mental health. And so this partner said, everybody I'm sure assumes he's straight if they've never met him. Like, I'm sure that's the assumption. I feel like that would be very difficult to know that that was part of your identity and for it to be muffled rather than being able to have that expressed more readily. So while, yeah, families sometimes presented as publicly normative, they didn't always want to do this, and this really depended on context. And so in some ways then partners said that their family was able to be presented as publicly non-normative. And so this could be openly presenting themselves as being an LGBTQ plus family. And this, for the partners who are in same gender relationships, this wasn't really a choice. Often they were just perceived as that they couldn't present any other way. But some of them, even across family types, talked about really wanting to be open about this and kind of set an example for others. And so this family talked about being one of the only foster families in the area who is LGBTQ family, and they try and change the attitude as much as they can in the safest way possible without endangering their kids. And so then in other ways, partners talked about trying to advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. So not just through representation, but through kind of activism. And this was not just for partners who also identify within the community, this is straight partners as well. And so this partner talked about joining a queer allies network at work and trying to do this to help not just her partner, but also for the wider community. And so in that sense, she was these partners were talking about being open about being in a relationship with someone who is bi, and not just letting that be something that's within the home, but trying to be really open about that and advocate for them. And then the final way in which families are publicly non-normative was through spending time with LGBTQ communities. This could be things like going to Pride as a family and really displaying that this is their community and wanted to involve their child on this and make it clear that this is the community they want to surround themselves in and this is a positive thing for them. So this family talks about bringing their child to Pride and saying she enjoyed all the sort of colourful outfits. I mean, it's just part of our existence. It's an opportunity to bump into friends and catch up with them. So by presenting as this LGBTQ family, this opened up opportunities for like really positive social interactions. So yeah, like I said, this was context dependent and there were different factors that could affect how families would move between publicly normative and non-normative. So yeah, this study was one of the first to look at partners of bisexual fathers and understand their experiences and how they think about what bi-identity means in the family. And although there was a lack of diversity in the sample in terms of gender, ethnicity, and social class, and it was quite a small sample, and also with partners being recruited through fathers, we're likely to see more positive outcomes because they're ones that fathers who actually thought they'd want to take part. But this still offers the first kind of insight into partners' perspectives on this. So to conclude, this kind of reflects what I found about bi-dads' perspectives about their family life. So they value challenging heteronormative expectations, but this was also dependent on social context and concerns around stigma. And we can kind of see that partners engage in similar identity work to fathers, even if they don't share the same stigmatized identity. So this kind of identity management takes place on a family level. And so future research could look at what these kind of family level processes mean in terms of minority stress, how this affects families' well-being. And the survey phase of my study, which I'll move on to next, later in the year, is going to look at what kind of factors are affecting bi-dads and their children's well-being. So thank you for listening, and obviously thank you to all the families who took part. If you have any questions that you're not comfortable asking here, just feel free to email me. But yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Maisie. Amazing work, so interesting. And I will have some questions, but I think we can, if nobody in chat right now has any question, maybe we can move with the presentation, then do a little debate so we can tackle different issues. And very interesting about the aspect of gender nonconformity. Okay, there we have one. That's great. Casey asked us, like, is in your sample, did the fathers know and disclose they were bi near the beginning of the relationship, or did some disclose further into the relationship? Did these or other factors impact the teams over time?
Yes, you would like me to answer this now?
Yes, of course, go.
Yeah. So there was a bit of range. Most of them had known within at least for 5 years, some of them for over 10 years, and some of them knew right at the start of the relationship, and that was something that they chose to go into the relationship knowing the partner was bi. And it did, I think some of this kind of shifting between publicly normative and non-normative did depend on that. So some partners talked about how when the dad first came out, they found this quite emotionally challenging, or they had a lot of questions for what this would mean for the family. And actually, as they came to realize that it was a personal thing, and then what it means for the family being, we're an LGBTQ family, and that can be a positive thing that connected them to a community. So actually people who didn't necessarily know about it from the start could find that actually thinking, oh, I didn't know I was part of this community and now I am. That's a really positive thing. So that was something really interesting I found, was partners basically trying to find their place in the community and what that means. Like the partner who talked about being a queer ally at work, sort of understanding that although she didn't know this was her community before, now it is because of her family, and how can she engage with that publicly? So yeah, I think obviously on an individual level it changed over time, but there were some differences. But at the time of the interview, all of them had known for a while, and so they felt quite positively about this. I hope that answers your question.
That's great, yes. Then we'll move to our next presenter. Here I am. Corey Tatz, Bisexual plus Men, Discretion and the Heteropatriarchy. Corey Tatz is a third-year gender studies PhD student at Indiana University, Bloomington. He holds a Master of Gender Studies from Memorial University of Newfoundland. His research interests include masculinities, bi plus sexuality studies, hookup culture, reality TV, ethnography, autoethnography, and LGBTQ sex education. So thank you, Corey. The floor is yours.
Okay, just one second. Okay, hello, welcome everyone to my presentation. So this was part of my master's thesis. It was a 2021 to 2022 case study, where I was really looking at MSM, men who have sex with men. So in my study, I would say about half, I had about 40 MSM, about half said they were bisexual, the other half said they were straight identifying, but I would still say a lot of those who were saying they were straight identifying were also saying they were bi-curious, so I would still put them into a lot of them into the bi plus category. It was a case study taken in the Southeast, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and mostly everyone was recruited through Reddit. Mostly a lot of like Reddit for Redditors are bisexual men. So yeah, most and it was heavily concentrated in Metro Atlanta and Georgia as well. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about discretion, but also the down low. So just defining the down low, I define it as men who have sex with men who are typically married or have a girlfriend while hooking up with men in secret. These men typically present as both hetero and hypermasculine. The DL is typically a complex depiction of masculinity intertwined with secretive same-sex sexual behavior, or according to Robinson and Salvador Vidal Ortiz. Black men are more likely to call themselves down low because it is, quote, way of creating and claiming a new sexual identification rather than a way of hiding one's sexual orientation, since there is a substantial stigmatization around homosexuality in the Black community. So in fact, the down low was originated as a term primarily for Black men. However, part of what I was looking at was seeing how, because today, especially within the US framework, down low has been appropriated, and pretty much men of every single race will say that they are on the down low, and also a similarness with being discreet. So in contrast to being openly gay or bi, the down low helps to ensure one's position within the heteropatriarchy is secure. There was, especially within white men, there is a distinct difference between public image and private play. Um, so Black men in the DL, the term down low has historically, like I said, been associated with Black men. There are negative connotations of homosexuality in the Black community. This is in part due to Black queerness being perceived as weak, powerless, and apathive. Black men are pressured to appear to be hyper masculine at all times. Black men are seen as traitors to their communities, as they are sought to transmit disease and pathology to Black women, according to McCune Jr. They become othered, demonized, and, quote, dysfunctional. So among Black men, MSM are marginalized. The blame gets put on MSM for spreading these diseases. This may be important a factor to being on the down low. Discovery of their practices could reflect poorly, not just on the individual, but the entire family. Also, a lot of the time when I'm talking about MSM, I'm not just talking about an identity, but more so a behavior group of people. So there's no need for the DL men to come out per se when they're satisfied with being able to appear hetero, whether they are or not, while sleeping with men on the side. And if a Black man identifies as bisexual, he may choose not to come out due to the negative connotations associated with the label of being bisexual. There's the potential of the backlash within the Black community if Black MSM are seen to adhere to any non-hetero identity. So moving on to the next slide, participants and their cultural upbringings. So among the participants in my study, Amir, who grew up as Episcopalian, and the churches his family attended were usually majority Black, he had said. He explains that his, quote, parents are religious, and I was raised a bit sheltered and grew up with a perspective on sex that was reserved for marriage, and anything aside from that wasn't a good thing, Amir said in 2021. Amir had a time or a place to explore his sexuality growing up, and it was time for, quote, the talk. And his dad handed him a cartoon book about it and told him to let him know if he had any questions. He had said in 2021. He did consider himself DL as an adult. He was able to explore his sexuality, something that would have been difficult when he was younger. As a Guyanese Muslim man, Luke grew up in a more conservative household. He stated that, quote, it is considered to be a sin anything but straight. He brought his family, He thought his parents wouldn't take the news well due to his religious upbringing. And even though being LGBTQ is more accepted in the global north, he pointed out that this was not the case in less developed countries, as violence can occur. And although Luke spent his adolescence between Toronto and Atlanta, cities which we consider pretty liberal or progressive, Guyanese and Muslim culture were still relevant in his upbringing. The only person in his circle that knew he was bisexual was his best friend, who's someone he was actually also hooking up with. He had told me in 2021. So Latino men and the down low. Latino men have always been part of this DL group on websites and apps, especially in large urban centers. And there's also been large Latino groups that have been historically, racially, and geographically linked to African Americans than others. Latinos often do not fit in with the United States mainstream gay community and movement, which is greatly informed by white middle-class style and socio-cultural priorities, regardless of their own class position, according to Gonzalez. The down low gives Latino MSM the ability to sleep with other men without necessarily putting an identity label on their sexuality. And now white men who are on the down low. Now, historically, identifying as DL was not as common as white MSM, but again, this has really changed over time, especially currently in the southeastern cities such as Atlanta, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. In one study that they had found 20% of MSM and their sample identified as being down low. African American, Hispanic men were more likely to report as being DL than white men at this time that Lipinski had found. But today, like I said, this has changed, and more white men are considering themselves down low across hookup apps and websites, even across college campuses. The term DL has been appropriated to include men of all races, according to journals Benoit, Denise Lewis. The DL has become trendy to the appeal because it refers less to sexuality than it does to masculinity. The fact that more non-Black men are identifying as DL has helped it normalize it to a good degree. And even though there's definitely still some stigma attached, other groups of men have been able to clutch onto the DL, making it more universal. Through my own qualitative study, the DL has become commonplace from college students to working professionals. So the DL as a sexual behavior. It's important to understand that DL is not a sexual identity, but rather a way to categorize men to sleep with other men. Sociologist Tony Silva explains that a lot of MSM are able to, quote, separate a sexual encounter from feelings or emotions that they can categorize that, yeah, this is just together for a sexual release, end quote. It's often nothing more than a, quote, blowing a load, quote. This is often because MSM are readily available for such activity than women. The social pressures in Southern society discourage the more conventional labelings of these acts.
Yes.
As some of these same of the same experiences can range from experimentation to occasional fun. The DL is not a community. There's no DL pride, flag, or membership card. While DL embodies a specific type of MSM, it's a description of the behavior and not an identity. And then we have just the demographic breakdowns through my study. Asian men and the DL. So Hank, who grew up outside the perimeter, was the only Asian who participated in my interview portion of my study. Hank believed his race was a factor in NSA hookups with other DL MSM. He thought of himself as a rarity and novelty, as Asians may become difficult to come by, end quote. He believed himself to be fetishized by a lot of white MSM. He explained, quote, I like being wanted, I guess, end quote, as was a turn on for him to be, quote, an object of desire, giving something to someone to make them happy, end quote, he said in 2022. So a lot of the time, Asian men are excluded from the down low due to their, quote, appeal, which is rooted in culturally determined essentialist notions of Asian passivity or femininity. So Asian guys are often seen as more gentle or agreeable than white guys. So as seen as an interracial match, and it's seen as complementary, end quote, according to author Daniel Gathorpe. Thus, since the DL is often thought of as hyper-masculine behavior, Asian men are often excluded from the mainstream narrative because of both stereotypical notions of feminization and fetishization. So then discrete. So on hookup apps, the term DL has been synonymous with just being discrete. So they're interchangeable. So when I talk about a lot of times between DL and discretion, it's pretty much the same thing today. There are, however, subtle differences between the terms because it can relate to individual, social class, and geographic locale. I would defer, discrete as a situation in which MSM are not completely open about their same-sex experiences. They can usually demand some degree of anonymity, but this can vary. It's not necessarily mean that you have a girlfriend or a wife, which DL typically implies. There may be simply parts of themselves or their lives they do not want shared. So Kyle, for example, stated that on Grindr, he's not really out publicly as he prefers to stay discreet on the app. This means it's important that some NSA apps stay private. However, he says he's about open to being bisexual to around 15 or so friends, as it's been gradual. He essentially wants a buffer zone between people he meets virtually and in real life. His family does not know about his bisexuality, but he plans to come out to them if he were ever to get a boyfriend. So as we can see, it differs, discretion. The concept of discretion also varies. So TJ, who was once married to a woman, but now he's married to a man, he had said that, you know, he's still attracted to women and considered himself a sexual being with no boxes and no labels. However, he thinks most of his inner friends would label him as gay because he's in a same-sex marriage. However, because he lives in Georgia, he does consider himself discreet, especially within his business, because he feels like if he were ever to come out, he could lose a lot of business if people knew about his sexuality. So, MSM treatment across the Southeast. So like I said, the majority of my participants in the survey thought MSM were treated neutrally in their local area. However, even among those who stated in their general climate was neutral or positive, they still didn't want to be out themselves. They were general risk for these DL and discrete men, especially since a good portion of them were in commitment relationships with women. Colin noted that in his North Carolina community was maybe 50% 50 trending liberal, but but just because it was more liberal did not really alter his decision to be more discreet. You know, and there was also this general concession, especially, you know, among the bi men that, you know, their girlfriends or their wives would not be accepting of their bisexuality or of their or of their heteroflexibility. One person has said, I don't think so, not if she knew I'd done things behind her back. I could see the smallest possibility that she'd be interested, but not enough for me to speak about it. You know, and there's some men like Luke, on the other hand, who still plays with men, even though he has a girlfriend. He says, you know, she probably wouldn't like it, owning to their Muslim faith, so he's not open about it. Luke works in the finance sector, and hooking up with men is something he does to steam off after a stressful day. So Mr. Survey, who's from Alabama, who's now divorced, did not think his ex-wife would be approved of his same-sex experiences. So again, this all goes back to that. And the last thing I really wanted to mention was that a lot of these men also supported Trump because they thought for a lot of them, social issues weren't really a priority to them. So when they were thinking about like who to vote for, you know, LGBT rights were always a priority. So yeah, so I think in general, just to wrap things up, I would say a lot of these men, especially the more white men who, you know, within this heteropatriarchy, they basically, you know, use the down low and discretion as a way to keep up their notions of staying on top of the heteropatriarchy. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Amazing. Do we have any question? And I would say it's also interesting that the need to reaffirm a certain model of masculinity also applies for voting decision. I think that's a really good point that you make here in the last slide. Okay, I guess we'll think about it and then, but please feel free to write the question in chat and then we can get to it. Then I will welcome our third presenter. Bi plus Men, Digital Life Writing, Lived Experience and Cultural Imaginaries by Mateusz Miesiak. Is a doctoral student in gender studies at, I hope I'm pronouncing this well, Södertörn University in Stockholm, Sweden. His research project studies Bi plus Men digital life writing. It examines how online creative practices of self-expression can deepen our understanding of bi plus male identity and strengthen bi plus cultural imaginaries. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Give me a sec to... Here it is. Perfect. Yes. thanks a lot. One or two important caveats in the beginning, I think. So the first one is, I'm not a social sciences person. I am in gender studies, but I come mainly from comparative literary and media studies. So my project is gonna be a little bit different than those previously presented. And the second one is that I'm only beginning the fieldwork phase of my project. So I don't really have any specific findings, but this presentation is intended sort of to overview the ideas behind the project. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to the organizers both for arranging this space to share sort of diverse research on BIPOC sexualities, but also for letting me present today, because my proposal was submitted not even last minute, but way after the deadline. And despite that, it was accepted. So I'm really grateful for that. So as I said, I would like to talk a little bit about some concepts and approaches and methodologies I use in my project that I hope could diversify the ways in which we can strengthen representation and the sense of both self-awareness and belonging of BIPOC folks in the age of digital transformations and shifts. So I would first like to sort of deconstruct the title of the project. And it, of course, is made of three elements, one of which is a broad understanding of who BIPOC men are, including plural sexuality as a sort of feature of being attracted to either different genders or other qualities that might reach beyond gender, but also as sort of the term that encompasses the plurality of identity terminology that further complexifies what it means to be bisexual. The digital signals the sort of expansion of online presence, communication, and circulation, as well as the entanglement in the power play of platform governance, meaning how different digital venues are administered, what the rules are, who writes these rules, who owns these venues, and whether someone materially profits from the user interaction that occurs at these venues. So for example, this conference panel is being recorded and will possibly be made available on YouTube, which is on the one hand great because it makes the presentations available for a broader audience. But on the other hand, it also means that a private corporation will be administering it and quite possibly monetizing it. There might be as well Facebook or Reddit groups that gather BIPOC folks and provide digital community. But again, parallelly, private platforms benefit from it. And the question is whether we want the research on BIPOC sexualities and the actions we take for and the lives of BIPOC folks being a source of profit for private industries. Finally, in my project, I invite participants to explore and express themselves via live writing, which is a term that stands for diverse forms of autobiographical self-expression that I think is urgently needed for BIPOC folks, as biphobia and identity concealment hamper the courage and also the skills for and of self-expression, and as a consequence contribute to the worsening of the sense of life quality of BIPOC folks. So my project's aims are to explore lived experiences and broaden sort of the understanding of what they are. As we know, many BIPOC folks tend to question the legitimacy of their identities, as in their perspective, they don't have the actual experience of, for example, being in intimate relationships with partners of different genders. And in my research, I want to reinforce the perspective that things such as subjective self-perception, sexual fantasies, or even unfulfilled desires of having partners of different genders also count as legitimate lived experiences that form the bi-plus sexual self and are worth sharing and building upon and expressing. Finally, by establishing a digital archive of bi-plus men's life writing, which I'll talk about in a minute, I hope to enrich culture imaginaries associated with bi-plus sexualities and their intersections with gender, and to sort of strengthen the presence and representation of bi-plus folks. So the current focus of my research work is building and coordinating the bi-plus men's digital life writing archive that can be found at the address barchive.se. And as I said, the project and the archive is still in its infancy. It functions mainly as sort of an advertisement site where participants can read about the project and send their expressions of interest, but eventually the website will turn into an actual archive displaying the life writing works bi-plus men create for everyone to see and hopefully get inspired by. So the archive is intended to provide opportunity for this self-expression and community that, as I said, is not dependent on the content management regulated by private economic interest. So this is run via the infrastructure of Södertörn University, which is a public university located in Sweden, and is transparent regarding how, for example, sensitive personal data is processed. And it's also confidential, meaning that the life writing works that participants submit will be published under pseudonyms, and their actual names will be kept secret, and they always have the right to withdraw their consent. Therefore, the archive is community-oriented and not profit-oriented. And it sort of wants to put university or academia as an institution with its resources as yet another actor in the digital space that could maybe introduce some sort of affirmative change that contributes to society. And finally, the project aspires to realize the principles of participatory research, meaning that my research is not only analytical, representational, and descriptive, but is conducted for the participants and together with the participants in a way to create a digital spaces that my participants need. So if anyone's interested or knows anyone who would be interested, they can contact me at my email address and see more info about the project on barchive.se. So thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much. Amazing work, really interesting project, and it's really also really nice graphics. I think it's pretty good, and I think later we're going to have a panel on bi-plus history and archives, So I think definitely you're going to go there and have a nice discussion, because we have a lot of good, really great archivists in our BIPLAS history, and I think it's important because like our history has been erased for so long. We really need to get some effort. So if we have any question, or I can move and I'll do my best. Okay. Just for introducing our last presenter of the day in a synchronous presentation. Our presenter is Alexander Danardanu, him. Alexander is a neurodivergent, hard of hearing, bisexual transgender man from Indonesia who has been active in the local queer movement since 2015. He's a member of several queer collectives, including, and I hope I'm pronouncing it well, Collective Tanpa Nama, Trans Men Talk, and Collective Kuda Laut, with a focus on advancing access, justice, and reproductive health, particularly for trans individuals. His presentation is called Bisexual Transgender Men in Queer Spaces, Navigating Identity, Relationships, and the Fight for Reproductive Rights. I'm just asking anybody for some feedback. You can see the video.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
It seems
Thank
so,
you.
yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Danardanu, a bisexual transgender man from Indonesia. Today I want to discuss a group that often goes overlooked within the queer community, bisexual transgender men. Bisexuality is frequently misunderstood or erased, not only in mainstream society but also within the queer spaces. For bisexual transgender men, the challenges is twofold: navigating both their identity and bisexuality in environments that often marginalize both. Their experiences, particularly in navigating relationship, queer spaces, and reproductive rights. It offers critical insight into broader issues of inclusivity and the gaps in our understanding of bisexuality. Bisexual transgender men live at the intersection of two marginalized identities. Being transgender and being bisexual each present challenges, and together they create unique struggles in finding acceptance. Bisexuality is often erased or misunderstood, with people wrongly assuming bisexual individuals are either confused or not queer enough. This erasure is even more pronounced for bisexual transgender men whose bisexuality is downplayed in transgender spaces and whose gender identity is overlooked in bisexual spaces. Like any other research, this study comes with limitations that need to be acknowledged to fully understand the scope. This study is based on interviews with 6 bisexual transgender men from different parts of Indonesia. While their stories provide important insights, the small samples limits how widely the findings can be applied. It is also worth noting that the use of labels like trans men or bisexual is more common in urban settings. In grassroots community, these terms may not be understood or used the same way, which further narrows the study's reach. Since this study is centered on Indonesia, the findings may not reflect the experience of bisexual transgender men in other parts of the world. The cultural, economic, and legal context in Indonesia shapes these experiences, but these factors may differ in other regions. This research is based on qualitative interviews, offering deep personal stories, but not necessarily broader trends. Future studies combining qualitative and quantitative data could offer a more complete picture. There is limited research on bisexual transgender men, particularly outside the Western context. This study contributes to that gap but much more is needed to better understand the unique challenges this population faces. Now that we've covered the limitation, let's delve into the core of the research, understanding the experience of bisexual transgender men and the challenges they encounter. Even within the queer spaces that claim to be inclusive, bisexual transgender men often find themselves excluded or misunderstood. In many queer spaces focus on monosexual identities or prioritized cisgender experiences, leaving bisexual transgender men feeling invisible. For bisexual transgender men who are not on hormone therapy or struggle with passing, the challenge is even greater. They are often looked down upon by cisgender men who may view them as not truly men or simply because they do not conform to traditional masculine expectation. This leads to further marginalization where their gender identity is invalidated even within the queer community. In dating spaces, bisexual transgender men often face fetishization or are seen as novelties. Their bisexuality is sometimes trivialized, while their struggles with passing and accessing hormone therapy can lead to rejection or exclusion. This exclusion doesn't just occur in social spaces, it extends into the healthcare as well. Transgender men already face significant barriers to accessing protective health care, and bisexuality further complicates this. Healthcare providers often fail to understand or acknowledge both their gender identity and sexual orientation, leading to inadequate care. People often mistakenly assume bisexual transgender men only date cisgender women, ignoring their actual experiences and failing to provide necessary information on HIV prevention or reproductive health. For those who are not accessing hormone therapy, this assumption can result in even more barriers as their health concern may not be taken seriously. But sadly, reproductive health care isn't the only challenge. They also face cultural pressures and economic barriers. In Indonesia, rigid genders role leave little space for transgender identities. Bisexual transgender men often find themselves isolated or not fitting neatly into traditional gender expectation. This is even more pronounced for those who struggle with passing. Economic hardship make it difficult for many bisexual transgender men to access gender-affirming care, such as hormone therapy, gender-affirming clothing, or even basic items like binders. The perception of being in between often leaves them without full support from either queer or the other communities. Given these challenges, how can we make things better for bisexual transgender men? First is queer spaces must be truly inclusive, embracing the full spectrum of bisexual identities. This includes challenging narrow definition of masculinity and queerness that push bisexual transgender men into invisibility. Healthcare providers should receive specific training to understand the unique needs of bisexual transgender individuals. It is essential that both their gender identity and sexual orientation are respected in medical settings. Amplifying the voice of bisexual transgender men in media and activism is also crucial. Representation helps to break down the biases that keep them invisible. And let's wrap up with the final thoughts on why this is important. The experiences of bisexual transgender men reveal the critical gaps in our understanding of inclusivity. Their struggles in navigating queer spaces and healthcare highlights the areas that we must improve. Bisexuality is often erased or misunderstood. It is a crucial part of their identity and it deserves some recognition. The true inclusivity means embracing the full spectrum of identities so that no one is left feeling unseen or unheard. Thank you.
That was great and definitely interesting. Okay, thank you so much for all the speakers. Now, I think we've managed to find some time for some debate and more questions, if you have any, for all the presenters that are here with us today. And I think Samuel actually wanted to ask something, if you still have your question. Or if you have any question between, presenters for any other research, or I can chip in, because I have a lot of questions.
I do, yes, may I?
Yes, please.
Corey, what inspired you to pursue your study on MSM? You're muted, Corey.
Well, like I said in the chat, specifically if the discretion and discrete part is, I was always just curious about, how the DL has been appropriated and why, even though it's a term that started with Black men, why is it, how did it get to be very universal? And yeah, and I think, seeing especially a lot of white men identifying, a lot of like young white men identifying as being down low, really is what got me curious to, research it further. And I think, I think through my research, I was kind of hoping maybe for more of a diverse, set of, participants. But I think it also comes down to, because I think most of the participants I did get were white men. So I guess it does go down to being being appropriated. But I think a lot of it goes down to your own positionality as a researcher as well, and I acknowledging that as too. Thank you.
And do you hope to flesh this out more to include more diversity to publish the study?
I'll probably want to do maybe another study further. So I guess we'll see.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other question? Okay, then I go. Maisie, I would love to ask you to go a bit deeper about what do you think is the role of gender nonconformity. So you talked a lot about passing. I'm also starting to do some research on bi+ parents, and I did some interviews of bi+ parents in Italy. And I found really interesting that there's this perception, sometimes kind of a fetish, the idea of a really masculine bi+ man that dominates, it's predatory. We have this kind of idea that is always looking for sex and everything. But I found in my participants over the years, bi+ men in general and bi parents, that there's definitely some also gender nonconformity, like an aspect of femininity, masculinity, or anything in between. So I would love to ask you, you talk sometimes being gender nonconforming was an advantage in relationships for gender roles. And if you can say us something more about even how this concept came up maybe in your research.
Yeah, so a few of the partners actually talked about how they felt that the bi dad they were having, they were in a relationship with, didn't sort of conform to traditional masculinity as much, and they found that was something that really drew them into that relationship, even if they didn't know that they were bi at the time. So they found that they were tend to be more emotionally connected, less kind of trying to fit in with the guys, and the partners kind of said that they felt that, I guess because they weren't worried about being seen as gay, because they, in the sense, there's that thing of typically straight men don't want to be perceived as gay, so they try, and so for bi men they sort of thought, well, they're not worried about that, so they had more freedom to kind of be open to those things. So for a lot of partners that was a really positive thing. They felt it brought them closer to them. And some even talked about how things like doing traditionally feminine activities together, they felt that it was, one participant said, it's like having a gay best friend and a partner all in one, which was a bit of a funny way to put it. But it's like, for partners, they felt like having someone who isn't a traditionally masculine man, but is still someone that they're attracted to as a straight woman, it meant that they had this kind of unique relationship compared to other people's husbands that they knew, kind of thing. And some participants, some of the bi-dads were non-binary, and so that was also a different element to it, where in terms of this kind of adapting their presentation to be more normative at times, that meant actively kind of changing their clothing and their presentation in a much more difficult way, in that they, around the family and around their children, they'd be really openly playing with their gender expression and tell the kids, like, yeah, I'm not a man or a woman, like I'm non-binary. But when it came to things like being around school, they would think, well, if I can pass as a man, that's just much easier, and if I can pass as a straight man, even better. And so, yeah, this kind of gender nonconformity, even for partners who the bi-dad did identify as cis, like they didn't feel like those masculine expectations were as important, and that allowed more freedom then within the family for the partner to do different kind of gender expression in different roles as well, because they weren't feeling like they had to meet any expectations that the partner had. Does that make sense? It's hard because it's coming from the partner's perspective, so it's sort of how they think about the bi-dad's masculinity and femininity. But yeah, it was definitely something that was seen to be an advantage, but then also that was kind of could be a concern in kind of public spheres at times. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Absolutely, thank you. And there's another question for you in chat. How do you think the selection process for partners of bi-dads might have affected the kind of answer you obtained?
Yeah, so it's made a massive difference. The problem that I had was there's no way of so because my studies of bisexual families and my survey was of bi-dads, that was who was filling in the survey. I didn't want to, obviously it's only people who know about, like for a start, it's going to be partners who know that their partner's bi. I couldn't ask them questions about it if they didn't know, and I couldn't find that they didn't know. But then also, I didn't want to approach partners without having the consent of the bi-dad, which was just something, because my study was centered around bi-fathers, I didn't really feel comfortable doing a separate recruitment strategy that would be specifically going into, like, I looked into it, but it would mean going into forums of people who are saying my partner's bi, like, what does it mean? And a lot of that was quite negative, and promoting this kind of hostile response to bi men coming out. And I kind of thought, within the scope of the study that I was focusing on bi-fathers, I wanted to go through the bi-dads. I didn't want to be kind of perpetuating this, let's talk about them behind their backs kind of thing, which I know obviously then means that I've got a lot of partners who generally feel positive about it. But there was a variety of responses, and another analysis, it was a content analysis looking at their feelings, partners' feelings at the time of disclosure and at the time of the interview. And there were some different partners who were open to telling me how they felt really worried about it at first. They felt really confused, they found it difficult, but those feelings had improved over time. So there was some variation there. And when I write up those findings, that'll tell us a bit more about kind of the difficult feelings that partners had about bi-dad sexuality. But yeah, obviously the sample is going to be those who've come to terms with it and who are open to talking about it. And it's very hard. I know there are going to be people out there who aren't open to talking about it, but I didn't feel like it was my place to try and approach them and get them to talk to me about it, if that makes sense. That's probably something for putting a bit more thought into, because it would be good to hear those voices, but I think that's going to take a lot of thought consideration of how we kind of access those people.
Thank you so much. And really, we just have 1 minute, but we have another one for Corey. Do you think that the down low men who would vote for Trump do it mostly because they are supportive of him, or to further hide their dialness? Is this a word? I don't know, but we can make it one. If you can just be...
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit of both. I think that for some of them, like living in like rural Alabama, Tennessee, you know, it's kind of like part of the culture they're part of. So kind of going within that heteropatriarchy. But honestly, I think for a lot of them, they actually do just support him. And I think that because they're just trying to adhere to the straightness and staying on top of that heteropatriarchy. So to them, social issues just it's not a big thing. There was like one participant who had said, oh, you know, I'll go to like Pride with my wife, but I'm not one of them. So kind of like yeah, thinking that just these social issues are not really apparent to them, so they're assimilating within the white hegemonic realm that we live in. So I think it's a little bit of both, but a lot of them really truly are Trump supporters. And I think as it is, like the majority of white men in the US do vote for Trump as well. So, and you'll even see some, gays for Trump even as well. So I don't think it is out of the ordinary. I hope that answers. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Corey. We are perfectly in time to go and join our meditation session with Oli Lipsky. So thank you everyone for being here in this panel on bi plus masculinity. Hope it's been a great session for you. And see you all on the meditation side and for the next panels. And I hope you enjoy this. See you later. Bye.